Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. We have a 1 week break, and now we are back to chapter 3, part 2, second part of the passage there. So, okay, let's go through a bit first on the outline that we have been following. Everybody can hear me okay, yeah? Right? Okay. So, we are at chapter 3, which talks about faith proof, and then about perfection in speech, which we cover in the first part of the chapter 3. So tonight we are going to the second part, chapter 3, verse 13 to 18. Okay, so before I go into it, let me just give a quick recap. See, in chapter 3, the focus is on two words, words and wisdom. James is trying to say to us that uncontrolled words and the wisdom of the world always leads to destruction. And those who trust God understand that neither human speech nor human philosophy will lead them toward a faithful life. So we see in chapter 3, verse 1, James warned those not he warned that not everyone should strive to be teachers, right? For they will be judged more strictly. Then verse 2 onwards, he tackles the tongue, right? And his bottom line on the first part of the passage is that the tongue is unbelievably powerful and it cannot be fully controlled. A person who could perfectly control his or her speech 100% of the time would have already arrived at full control of every aspect of the entire body and their entire life. But that is not so, right? Yes, the tongue, James says, is small, and so is the beat in a horse mouth, and the rudder on the ship, and the spark that ignites a forest. And that forest fire is the one James was focusing on. Right? He calls the tongue a fire that sets the whole course of our lives on fire and is itself set on fire by hell. He calls it a restless, unstable evil, full of fatal poison. In fact, James insists the tongue is untamable, right? I think many of us would agree with that. We have no hope for controlling our words on our own as sinful human beings. Now, see, he pointed out that blessing and cursing shouldn't come out of the same mouth. That's very bizarre and sinful. He says that it is as weird as salt water and fresh water coming out of the same spring together. And he also said that it is as weird as olive trees growing figs. And yet, speaking both blessing and curses with the same tongue is normal behavior for the sinful humans. So that is the things that we covered, right, in the last part, the first part of James chapter 3, verse 1 to 12. So we go on to verse 13 onwards. So verse 13, chapter 3 of James, it says, "Who is wise and understanding? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom." So the question he posed here, who is wise and understanding among you? Can I also pose this question to us all here? Among us here, who is wise and understanding? Can you just leave your hand? Or Brian, I saw your hand up. No, not you. Anyone? You just use the icon and just wave your hand if you think you are wise and understanding. Anyone? Don't be too modest. It's okay if you know that you are wise. Just admit it. Nobody. We are all too humble to say. Okay, the question actually is, how do we spot a wise guy or a wise person among us? All right. See, oftentimes we have different ideas of what a wise person looks like. Huh? Perhaps it's someone who wear glasses, especially thick glasses like Brother Terence. He looks very wise wearing his dark glasses, and also Brian and Grace also here. Huh? Or is it someone with gray hair, like Brother Gokmao or Pastor Lim, right? Okay, the wise old gray hair. Huh? Or we sometimes think of someone with a lot of degrees on his or her wall, huh? Or someone who reads a lot. So are those wise people among us? So let's look at the question, what is wisdom? All right. Wisdom is the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. Right? That's the dictionary definition of wisdom. So is wisdom same as knowledge? No, they are not actually. All right. A wise person may be knowledgeable, but a knowledgeable person is not necessarily wise. Okay. And knowledge passes the seminary course, but wisdom walks with God. Okay. And you can build a house with knowledge, but it takes wisdom to build a home. Knowledge can construct a Titanic, but wisdom will avoid the icebergs. And then also, wisdom is not measured by degrees, but by deeds. Okay? It is not a matter of acquiring truth in lectures, but of applying truth to life. And this is what James is going to emphasize on, that we show our wisdom by deeds. All right? Do we truly have the wisdom of God? Okay? So going back to the verse just now, who is wise and understanding among you? So at the beginning of this chapter 3, James was addressing those who were teachers or wanted to be teachers among the Christians then. Huh? And then he told such teachers that how they should talk, right? For James chapter 3 verse 1. But here, he is going to talk about how they should live, right? It's not just talking, but how they live out their lives. So James actually addressing the person who is wise and understanding. The word wise is sophos, huh? And that's a technical term among the Jews for the teacher, all right? The scribe, the rabbi. So it appears that James is still talking to those who will be teachers in James chapter 3 verse 1. And it is not what they say that he's concerned with, but rather how they live. That's his focus, all right, in the second part of the chapter 3. But of course, the whole passage is also directed to all its readers, which includes you and me, okay? So we see here that wisdom is not mere knowledge. Real wisdom and understanding will show in our lives by our good conduct, all right? And in this sense, wisdom and understanding are like faith. You know, remember James is focusing on show me your faith by works. All right. So he is talking about that, and wisdom and understanding are like faith. They are invisible inner qualities. If a person considers himself to be wise or understanding, it is fair to expect that this invisible inner quality will show itself in regular life. So he is trying to tell us how can we see if a person is really wise and understanding. And then he talks about his works are done in meekness or wisdom. So what he is saying is true wisdom is also evident by its meek manner. Right? The word meekness is actually it can mean humility. It can also mean gentleness. The word for it is protest, is gentleness, but not a passive gentleness growing out of weakness or resignation. It is an active attitude of deliberate acceptance. Okay, a quote by Buddhic. So James is challenging us to really demonstrate what we claim to have. Okay, and James is telling us that wisdom is not merely intellectual knowledge, it involves accompanying behavior. The wisdom that comes from God will be seen in our good conduct. And part of this conduct is, of course, gentleness. So, do you think you are wise? Do you think you are understanding? You have understanding? Then James is saying that show it in your good conduct, which is led by gentleness. All right. We move on to verse 14. It says here, but if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exists, confusion and every evil thing are there. So James first said that we should not boast or brag about having bitter envy and selfish ambition. Now, what is bitter envy? Bitter envy means that we really want something that someone else has. Okay, we desire it to the point that we become bitter. That's why I call bitter envy. All right, and envy is the resentful and even hateful dislike of the good fortune or blessing of another. That's what envy is. In fact, envy is also one of the 7 deadly sins. All right. Remember, I mentioned about anger. Anger is also one of the 7 deadly sins. Okay, so envy is also considered as one of the 7 deadly sins. Someone defined this: that envy is an emotion which occurs when a person lacks another's superior quality, achievement, or possession, and either desires it or wishes that the other lack it. So that kind of feeling, of envy, jealousy kind of thing. So Aristotle, it was quoted as saying this. He defined envy as pain at the sight of another's good fortune, stirred by those who have what we ought to have. Okay? Why is he getting what I should have? Why don't I have it? So there's a pain, he's saying, Brian has something that I don't have. Why is it? So it's painful for me. Okay? So the question is, do we have envy in our hearts? I think as we go along, think about it, okay? Whether it applies to you. perhaps as we go along the various description, make it as a checklist, a self-checklist, okay, whether it applies to you. So to go on, I talked about self-seeking, all right? Self-seeking is also selfish ambition. It means that we are motivated to do something that serves us and our own interests only, right? That's selfish ambition or self-seeking. James said that if you have these things, you should not boast about it. For if you do, you are denying the truth. You are lying against the truth, right? And notice the word here, this wisdom, all right? He is actually referring to Peter envy, right? And self-seeking, this wisdom, meaning that he labels Peter envy and self-seeking as wisdom, right? And therefore he is saying that wisdom is a feeling or a thought, okay? And that Peter envy and selfish ambition is a form of wisdom, but not the right kind of wisdom, right? And of course, James is also saying that to boast of such attitudes and feeling is to deny the truth. Okay, and every time some people open their mouth to give expression to their feelings, they actually deceive themselves. Okay, and self-deception is the worst kind of deception. You are bluffing yourself. And then now James is making it clear where this supposed wisdom, the wisdom that is referring to Peter envy and self-seeking, where this supposed wisdom comes from. He says it does not come from above. It does not come from God. And of course, this is in contrast to wisdom that does come from above, about which we read in James chapter 1. Remember, in James chapter 1, verse 5, says, now if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him. And in verse 17, it also say, every good and perfect gift is from above, okay? Coming down from the Father of lights, and who does not change like shifting shadows. That is in James chapter 1, verse 17, all right? So we see here, James is describing, using three adjectives to describe the earthly wisdom, all right, that's stated here. Number one is earthly, okay, which is worldly, okay, and this wisdom is bound to this earth. It stands in contrast to that which God originates in heaven, okay, and there's nothing transcending or of any lasting value in earthly wisdom. Just like everything else material, it is subject to corruption and decay, right? Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 35, he says, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Everything else will pass away, not lasting, not eternal, all right? And then 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10 to 11, it says, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. So all this will not last forever, okay? So that is earthly wisdom. The second one he mentioned is sensual, right? Sensual, a description of the earthly wisdom is sensual, means it's of the flesh, okay? It is fleshy and unspiritual. Earthly wisdom has no understanding of spiritual concept, okay? In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14, it says, but the natural man received not the things of the Spirit of God, but for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. So the normal, fleshy, carnal person can never understand all this, right? The things of the Spirit of God. That's all there is. This type of wisdom is sensual, fleshy, all right? And number three is demonic. It is of the devil, all right? Okay, and this line of thinking is from the devil himself, okay? And 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 1 says, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times, some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of the devil." Right? So they are influenced by this kind of wisdom from the devil. Right? So in short, earthly wisdoms is worldly, of the flesh, and of the devil. Okay? And he goes on to say that envy, and selfish ambition causes confusion. Verse 16. And every evil thing. Okay? And this will result in disorder and evil practices. Okay? You see, where you find bitter envy, you will find confusion and disorder. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33 says, "For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all churches of the saints." So you know for sure it is not from God, okay? But not following the way of God creates disorder and brokenness in our lives. See, God wants direction, order, and clarity in our lives. And however, when we depart from His ways and pursue our own ways, it creates a mess. And that's what sin will do to us when we depart from God's ways, right? When we go into sinful thoughts and sinful behavior, it will create disorder and leads to every evil practice. Okay. Then we go on to verse 17 and 18, which is entitled "The Character of Heavenly Wisdom." Okay. Says, "But the wisdom that is from above is pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." So you can see here a list of description of godly wisdom. So I have listed down the 7 marks of godly wisdom here, taken from verse 17. Okay, let's look at it one by one. Pure. Pure is, he says, pure, first pure. All right, that means the first of the most important. You see, wisdom fundamental quality is purity. And pure is a synonym of holy, right? Wisdom that comes from God is pure because God himself is pure or holy. And holiness is God's primary attribute. First Peter chapter 1 verse 16 says what? "Because it's written, be ye holy, for I am holy." And then pure indicates that which is immaculate, undefiled, and without admixture, right? That means it's unadulterated. Okay. Now, pure from the Greek word itself called hagni. It means undivided taste. It means very pure. Okay. And no one that allows immorality or sin in their life is a smart person. okay, or a wise person. So meaning that it is not wise to live in disobedience and rebellion. And holiness leads to happiness, while sin leads to sadness. Or should I say, holiness leads to joyfulness, right? Okay. And holiness, Matthew chapter 5, verse 8, it says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." If you want to see God, you must have purity in your heart, right? That's why he stressed that the godly wisdom must be pure, all right? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14 says, "Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. For without holiness, no one will see the Lord." Okay? Without holiness, no one can see God. Okay? The next one is peaceable. James is stressing that true wisdom does not look for trouble, but looks for peace. Okay? So he's saying godly wisdom is peaceable or peace-loving, putting a high value on easing conflict. Right? Proverbs chapter 3, verse 17. You want to jot down, huh? Proverbs chapter 3, verse 17. It says, "Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace." Okay. Romans chapter 12, verse 18. Romans chapter 12, verse 18. "If it be possible, as much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men." That's a good advice in Romans chapter 12. The next one is gentle. Godly wisdom is gentle. Okay. You see, a wise man or a godly wise man speaks gently with humility, right? Can we say that a wise man is a gentleman? Right? And it's characterized by consideration. Okay. His wisdom is gentle or considerate, not ready to fight, but ready to serve. Gentle, which is also another meaning for that is humility. Okay, that's why Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 says, "Let nothing be done through strife or vain glory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves." The next one is willing to yield, meaning that it's easy to be entreated or entreated, means submissive person, easy to live with. Okay, it has a submissiveness as a character, which means that it's always ready to listen, open to suggestions, opinions, and corrections of others, and in the sense of not being stubborn or being willing to listen, to reason, and to appeal. Willing to yield. Okay, true wisdom is not rigid, but willing to listen and skilled in knowing when wisely to yield, so he can discern. All right, and also true wisdom does not try to start arguments, but tries to be reasonable and compliant. Okay, that's what it means by willing to yield. Another mark is full of mercy and good fruit. Okay, James is saying that true wisdom leads us to be people of mercy, quick to forgive, quick to overlook an offense. That's what it means to have godly wisdom. Do you have that trait, to be forgiving, to show mercy, right? In Matthew chapter 5, verse 7, it says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." So if you empty your cup of mercy, God will fill it up. Okay. If you show mercy to others, God will show mercy to you. Okay. We talk about mercy in chapter 2, verse 13 of James, right? It's talking about showing mercy. You'll be judged by mercy, okay? Now, this wisdom knows that the same measure of mercy we grant to others is the same measure of God will use it with us. Matthew chapter 7, verse 2. Okay? So basically, true wisdom is full of mercy and all the good things that flow from living this way. All right? Full of good fruits. And this wisdom can be seen by the fruit it produces. Okay. Then the next one, number 6, is without partiality, meaning is unwavering, right? A godly person, exhibiting godly wisdom will not be wavered by things and circumstances. He will deal with people fairly and equally. So true wisdom sticks to the truth and the correct way without favoring. All right. And this wisdom is impartial, not showing the favoritism that James mentioned in chapter 2. We had some discussion on that before, right? Okay, do not show favoritism. And this wisdom is also sincere, with no need to fake anything to get what it wants out of other people. That's without partiality, right? And the last one is without hypocrisy, right? Which means it is genuine, right? Without pretense. It says true wisdom does not put on a false front, but is genuine and real all of the time. He is sincere, as there's no hidden agendas or motives in the judgment as a wise person renders it. Okay, and actually the word, let me just express a bit more on hypocrisy. The word hypocrite ultimately comes from the English, came into English from the Greek word hypocrites, which means an actor or a stage player. I found this quite interesting. It says the Greek word itself is a compound noun. It's made out of two Greek words that literally translate as interpreter from underneath. Okay, and this is you will understand it if you know that during the ancient time, the actors in Greek theater, they wore large masks, masks, and to mark the character that they were playing, and so they interpreted the story from underneath the mask, not the mask that we're wearing now, but the face mask. Okay, so sometimes when they do an acting and they want to show a sad person, they will take a mask that shows sadness in the face, and after they will change and put on another one that's angry mask, and another one later they will put on the happy mask. So basically, what it says is hypocrites are people who put on masks, right? Who pretend to be what they are not. Okay, do we have people among us like that, or are we like that at times that we put on masks? And we are actually not very true to our own nature, right? And we let people see a different side of us, or we pretend to be something that we are not. That's a hypocrite, all right? So then we will go on to verse 18, right? It says, now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Okay, and this is the outcome of true heavenly wisdom. You compare verse 18 here to verse 16. Verse 16 comes out of evil, remember? All right, something confusion. All right, whereas this one, there's peace and there's fruit of righteousness. So what it says, you sow in peace like a farmer, you sow peace and you reap the righteousness of God. Okay, So James actually concludes his thoughts in verse 18 here with a beautiful word picture, right? He's talking about a field full and ready to harvest. And the crop of this field is what? Righteousness, goodness, and everything those who belong to God will hope to see in the world. Okay? The crop was planted by those who make peace. Okay? And therefore, James is telling that no, to be a good peacemaker, you sow in peace and you reap the fruit of righteousness. Okay? So that's the result of living by God's wisdom. So I finished tonight. It's a very short passage, only 5 verses. But let me just uh, give a summary, context of verse 18, verse 13 to verse 18. Okay, it's talking about the concept of who is wise and understanding, right? From verse 13 just now onwards. And James is telling us who is the truly wise, understanding person. Okay, one whose faith in God leads to selfless good works. Okay, he say wise people live in the humility of wisdom, humility, the meekness of wisdom, setting themselves aside to serve others. Okay, but that's not what worldly wisdom will do. You know, worldly wisdom will make each person responsible to serve himself only. Right? They put themselves first. And then earthly attitudes are driven by envy for what others have and an ambition to take it. What is the result? The result is disorder and evil instead of the peace, gentleness, and mercy that follow from living by heaven's wisdom. Okay, that's a quick summary of chapter verse 13 to verse 18. But then let me just also round up a bit by making a summary of chapter 3. All right. So I found this short summary which conceptualize the whole of chapter 3. Okay. Let's go through it together. In chapter 3, the summary, it says, human words are powerful. Our tongues are small, but they are capable of wreaking great havoc. Any person who could perfectly control their words would be in perfect control of their entire bodies. Instead, as sinful human beings, our tongues are untamable. Our words are fire, igniting the entire course of our lives. So we have to really guard our tongues. Okay. Now, say blessing God and cursing people should not come out of the same mouth. We are corrupted. Okay. And James concludes the chapter by exploring what it means to be truly wise. True wisdom is not necessarily found in those with the most education, money, or friends. Rather, wise people can be spotted living wisely in humility, participating in good works, enjoying peace, singleness of purpose, one mind, okay, and gentle lifestyle. Those are the marks of a true wisdom in the person, okay, a godly person who has a godly wisdom. Okay, that's summarized. So to end it, I like to pose a question, and I'd like you to just respond if you can, so that it will cause you to think a bit and really apply what we have just learned, okay, from this passage. Okay, we will have about a few minutes to do that. So I would throw out a question, and I'd like you to get ready to type it on the chat group, or you have a piece of paper and you can write it, and then later you can voice out your answers. Okay, okay, are you ready? Brian, please help me. Okay.
Okay.
Question is, after going through the whole of chapter 3, and talking about wisdom, question I want to pose here is how to have wisdom from God. Think about it, and then write down your answer. I give you about 3 to 4 minutes, right? Any points that comes to your mind, right? And let's help one another to establish these thoughts in us so that we can remember it well. How to have wisdom from God? We're talking, I think by now we are convinced that we need to have godly wisdom, right? I think most of us are very wise, so we can understand that, right? So, how to have wisdom from God? Just write down a few points. Okay, you can start writing down on the chat group. What is your answer? What do you think? How do we get wisdom from God? How do we obtain wisdom from God? How do we have godly wisdom? Anyone writing it already? Brian, do you see anyone? Or anyone want to just shout out their answers?
Pastor mentioned, watch our words with God's help. Terence said, pray, read Bible, have faith in God to apply despite worldly barriers or protests. Walk alongside godly people. Prayer, read God's word and obey. Yield our hearts, mind to God. And Franco said the Bible. And Quack
Who is
said,
that?
fear God. Uh,
The last one?
Uncle Quack says, fear God. Uncle Franco
Mm,
says the Bible.
mm.
David says, ask God who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. Uncle Thomas
Okay.
says, ask him. True.
Any more? Anyone want to add in a bit more before we go on? Yeah, I think all the answers are correct. Huh? Okay, so I pick up about 5 points here. So I think some of you already mentioned that. The first one was mentioned by, I think, Uncle Kotmao, is it? What did Uncle Kotmao say? Or Brian?
Uncle Thomas
He said,
says to ask him.
ask, ask, ask God, right? Yeah, and that's what I have here as the first one. Ask wisdom from God. You want wisdom from God? Ask from Him. Okay, so that in James, we have already gone through that in James chapter 1 verse 5. It says, if any one of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. All right, so if you think you don't have wisdom or the godly wisdom, just ask God, and don't worry, He is more than willing to give to us. Right, that's what it means. At this point, I just want to share a quick testimony. Ever since I started preparing for this book of James, especially the first lesson, I cover James chapter 1 verse up to verse 12 or verse 13 or so. I came to this verse 5. If anyone of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. And then I asked myself, you know, I think I need the wisdom from God. So I practice that, Okay. Before I never really asked God for wisdom in a sense. I just pray over certain things and ask God to help and God to give the answer. But when I read this word, I specifically say, God, you say in your word that I can ask wisdom from you. So I really did ask wisdom from God. And I can tell you, I think I receive it, okay? And there will come quite a number of cases or situations that I found that, hey, some of the decisions I made is quite good, okay? So that I have the wisdom from God and God guides us, all right? That's my personal testimony, all right? Anyone of you got such testimony to share that can encourage the rest of us? Nobody asks wisdom from God. Since you're all really very wise. Brother Terence got.
Well, one thing came to mind while you were sharing, which is that when we were talking about this Pastor Huang, when we were trying to recruit him, I think council really prayed really hard for wisdom from God lah. There was many opposing views, if we can say that, and but we try to practice lah, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, mercy, good fruit. We really did try lah. So we really pray. I think as a council, we prayed really, really hard lah for Pastor Huang. And I would like to think that God has blessed us with a decision that the whole council and the whole church can also be, how to say, be blessed with. I think that's one example.
Yeah. We all together ask God for wisdom, right? Brother Terence?
Yes, we did many times.
Anybody else got something to share along this line? Okay. So the second one is almost the same as the first one, right? Ask God, but ask faithfully, right? Ask God and ask faithfully. So what it means is in verse 6 and 7 of chapter 1, say, but let him ask in faith. This is following verse 5. But let him ask in faith without doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. We touched on that before, right? Okay. So what is stressing here is be faithful when you ask or pray for wisdom from God. Okay. You cast away all doubts and believe in him. Okay. In other words, you don't doubt. You have faith. You must rise up in faith and say, God, I'm asking you, and you are saying in your word here that we should not doubt. And you really believe that God will answer you. He has promised to give us when we ask of him. That's very critical when we ask for wisdom from God. To believe that there is truly that he will give to us generously, willingly. So we need to practice that. Okay. So number 1 and number 2 is almost the same. Okay. I just stress on being going before God to ask with great faith. All right. Rise up in faith. The Bible says you have to faith the seed of the mustard seed. The size of mustard seed. You can move mountains. Okay. So you practice that when you ask God for wisdom. And third one is walk in the fear of the Lord. Okay, did anybody? I think Brother Quet say that, is it? Fear of God.
Yep.
Very good. Yeah. Okay. So it says here, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. See? That's why it ties in with the wisdom. A good understanding has all they that do his commandments. His praise endureth forever. Okay? The fear of the Lord. In Proverbs 9 verse 10, it's also said, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. Okay? Can you think why is it the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom? Can someone share some thoughts here? Why is it that with the fear of God, then we have is the beginning of wisdom? Anyone? How does the fear of God brings about wisdom?
Maybe, not sure whether can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe fearing God causes us to walk in His ways, right? And in His ways will prevent us from making or stepping into the wrong zones of life, yeah, and hurting ourselves unnecessarily. So that's part of His ways itself is given to us. His commands is actually shows wisdom in itself already. Right?
Yeah.
Says his example. If he knows this, if there's a lion in front of the road somewhere, right? He'll tell us to walk not into the mouth of the lion, right? Right. So that's wisdom. So
Yeah.
he warns us of the danger ahead. And so if you fear the Lord, you will obey His commands.
Exactly. You fear the Lord. Yes.
Sorry. Another thought that I have is that often our decision makings are out of fear of man. A lot of time we make decisions out of fear of man. What will men think? What will men do? So, like Pastor say lah, when we fear the Lord, actually it is the correct way lah.
Yeah. Very true. Very good point there. So from what I see is when we fear God, that means we don't want to sin, right? We know that if we sin, then God will punish us. True or not? Okay. So we avoid sin, and that is a wise decision, right? Okay. That we will avoid sin because we fear God, and that is keep us safe. All right. That's why it's a wisdom to avoid sinning. Okay. So see, someone say, walk in the fear of the Lord. It is to hate evil, hate pride, hate arrogance, and the evil way. Okay. So it says, live holy, righteous life before God. Okay, and that will lead us to holiness. Fear of the Lord will lead us to holiness. And when you have the fear of God, you follow His teachings and obey His commands, then you'll avoid committing sins that will displease Him. Then you will stay away from acts that will inflict harm upon yourself and on other people near close to you. Okay, the next one. Okay, very fast. Be humble. All right. It says here, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by the good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. James chapter 3, verse 13, the first verse that we dealt with tonight. Okay. So you want to have wisdom from God, you live a humble life. Okay. Humility will help you overcome all other sins, right? Like envy, selfish ambition that leads to wicked practices. So choose humility and wisdom. Okay. And we should not be proud of that we have wisdom in the sense. Okay. The next one, I think some of you mentioned that also. Read the Holy Scriptures. Okay. Say verse chapter 3 of 2 Timothy verse 15 says, and that from childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. Okay. So basically it's telling us to be patient in reading and learning God's words in the Bible, because the scripture, the Bible, contains instruction, warnings, and guidance on how we should live and walk on earth. Okay, the more you know the words of God, the more you will be wise. And this, as it says in this verse here, the wisdom that leads to salvation. I would like to add, is also helping us to maintain salvation, meaning that we don't lose our salvation when we have this, the word of God with us that gives us the wisdom. All right. So that's where I end my session tonight. So back to you, Brian. Thank you very much.